Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Healthy Indoors Show. I'm your host, Bob Krell, publisher of Healthy Indoors magazine and the chief provocateur on this weekly live stream broadcast. Today, I think we have a really great topic today. We're talking, everybody's been discussing restarting the economy. And that's a global issue, right? It's not just in the United States, that's in Canada, it's everywhere, really, because we've been at an economic standstill internationally as a result of this pandemic. So certainly everybody agrees that we have to, start some form of economic restart here, lest we stay in this perilous financial situation. But we have to do it in a reasonable fashion so that we also don't relaunch this pandemic, to grander and uglier scales. So with us today is Graham Dick. He's the director and master trainer of Infection Control Training Group in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Graham has over 30 years industry experience and is recognized across North America as one of the most technical decontamination specialists in the property damage restoration industry. And I'll back that up, actually. I feel that way about him. He's a very, very knowledgeable man who I lean on heavily for information. He is a subject matter expert on infection control, microbial decontamination, forensic cleaning, fire soot restoration, and mold remediation. He spells mold the wrong way, but then again, he's from north of the border. So it's like you could argue that we spell it the wrong way. We left the U out. He speaks regularly on these topics and many more at environmental restoration, hospital facility conferences all across North America. And he served on numerous industry boards and councils and task forces. So again, welcome, returning back to our show, Graham Dick. How are you?
Hey, great to be here today, Bob, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
So I'm really excited to have you back. So many of you, if you've checked out the latest digital edition of Healthy Indoors magazine, Graham has written the cover story for us. And the story is reopening the economy, the missing link. And what we're going to talk about today is, some of the points that he brought up in this very, very forward-thinking article of some of the key components I think we need to be looking at as we attempt to restart things. But first, I guess some of you may have noticed that our wingman slash co-pilot seems to be absent. So the first picture I have to put up here is the question, of course, is where's Joe this week? And Joe is unfortunately previously occupied. I guess what can I say? We all have other careers outside of the Healthy Indoors Show. So Joe will be back with us next week. So it's Graham and me going at it. This is going to be this will be a fun conversation. So I guess let me start out. In that recent cover story for HI, you stated that as I listened, and this is your opening paragraph in the piece, and I'm going to paraphrase it. As I listened to the medical specialists, public health specialists, economists, and government officials talk and discuss the topic of how to restart the economic machine, I believe there is a significant and inexpensive element to the conversation that no one is discussing. So I ask you, what is that element that nobody's discussing, Graham?
Yes. It's the element is that we need to empower people to take control of their lives. And we're going to get into this because it's a process, and we're going to dive into it during this talk and some of the other questions. But it really starts with teaching people about risk assessment and the differences between hazard, risk, and exposure. So yeah, that element, empowering people.
So are you thinking basically that that's that whole conversation has been left off? Because after we received your article, went through the editing process on it, I found myself unable to find anybody else discussing this topic. So I think you hit on something that's a big issue.
Yeah, it comes from I guess I've always been someone that kicks against rules, and as I maybe got a little bit more mature, I started to understand why rules bug me, and why rules tend to bug people in general, and why society then develops the way it does in its reactions to rules. And I think we're seeing that right now during this pandemic in so many ways that this is playing out. And so yeah, this is.
I mean, you hit that as a point. You hit that as a point in your article. That concept of principles versus rules, and it's funny that you say that, because I think I have a tendency to buck rules too. I don't like inflexibility. So which approach makes the most sense in the wake of this?
Well, because of the way government exists in society and in culture globally and historically, initially rules are needed because that's just how society operates, and it is truly the most effective means to control the masses behavior in the short term. But then it's so important that you train people in the applicable principles, and you use the teachable moments that present themselves daily to train them on how to apply those principles. Because if you can never have enough rules, because for every rule you make, there's going to be a set of circumstances, a set of variables that don't apply specifically to that rule. And so then that rule becomes either too much or too little. And then people go, well, if that rule doesn't apply to me because it doesn't fit this little box of variables. And without them understanding the principles behind the rule, why that rule is important, what purpose that rule is supposed to serve or was designed to serve, then they're unable to go, okay, well, with this new twist, the principle is this, and therefore, if I do something this way, I'm still following the principle. It doesn't look like the rule, but I'm following the principle. And that's, at the end of the day, what was intended.
And I guess you would have to acknowledge that rules are somewhat by nature inflexible, right? I mean, they're prescriptive. They're very, for the most part, they are inflexible. They're very directive. And yeah, I mean, could you ever write enough rules to cover an indoor environmental issue?
Exactly. I mean, rules begat rules, and it's ad nauseum. I mean, that's where the legal system has gone, and most religious systems. I mean, take the way some people look at the Bible as an example, and you've got 66 books of rules if you listen to some people. And then from a standpoint of principles, you get back to, Jesus said, love God, love your neighbor as yourself. There you go. Couple principles, and you fulfilled all 66 books of rules, which you could never remember, and you'll never be able to follow it in 100 years. Right. So you don't have to remember much if you keep it to the principles and then follow a couple principles. And that's really how I think people need to, what the opportunity is here in our society is we had to start with the rules in order to make people safe, and in order to get things moving in a safe manner during a pandemic, during this scary time of a new disease, a novel disease. But then we need to go, okay, people, here are the principles on how you can assess any variable, any set of circumstances that you find yourself in on from day to day as you conduct your daily activities. And by following these principles, you can take control of your safety and the safety of your loved ones and your neighbor and yourself, right? So that's what we're talking about here.
One of the things you in the early part of your article, one of the things you mentioned was the concept of restricting deal flow. And what do you mean by actually what is restricting deal flow, and why is that an issue for trade associations or business leaders or even business owners and people in the workplace in general?
Oh, that's a great question. With this whole economic startup, what I see happening, and even with the way it's evolved with all of the businesses that continued to operate as essential services, and that was a really large sector of the economy. A lot of companies continued to operate, or were allowed to continue to operate should they choose to, and what evolved was a practice of restricting deal flow. And what I mean by that is we're only going to let one person into the store at a time. We're only going to let 3 people in. Now we can let 5 people in if the square footage is big enough, but we're going to make all the aisles one-way aisles, and start to restrict the flow of people through our businesses. Restaurants, on reopening, there is a lot of talk about and a lot of requirements around. You can't sit at the bar. You have to social distance. You have to set the tables further apart, and so your density within the restaurant is going to be 50% of what it was pre-pandemic. And if you talk to the average restaurant owner, restaurants are blasted hard to maintain profitability and at the best of times. Restricting the flow of patrons by 50% is a death sentence to all restaurant owners. It's not economically viable or sustainable. It just means that instead of killing them by a quick process,
financially, right?
You're killing them slowly.
Yeah. Because their margin. I mean, obviously, restaurants, they have certain peak table load times, right? They're trying to turn tables over, and if their maximum is half of what they could normally turn over, the margins just aren't there.
Right. Or take any retail outlet. You have periods and times where the density is greater, but that's, you make hay when it sunshines. And if all of a sudden during those peak flow periods, the store is restricted to only allowing a few people in, well, most people are not going to, with non-essential goods and services, most people are not going to stand in a line. And as a result, I think a lot of the purchasing that's gone online is going to stay online, because even though, I'd love to support my local business, I'm not going to stand in a line for 45 minutes. A friend of mine went to the store the other day, stood in the line for 45 minutes to get in, and then got home, realized that she'd made some mistake and needed to return the item. It was like, oh my gosh, now he's got to go stand in line for another 45 minutes to return the item. That's going to affect the sustainability and viability of businesses if they restrict access that way. And so I think trade associations and business leaders, what they've done is they've created work plans for their members that are just frankly unworkable, at significant operational costs, and make profitable operation almost impossible without breaking rules. And so, what's the average business owner going to do? They're going to break the frickin' rules because they need to feed their families. They need to survive. They need to pay their rent.
Right.
And if business owners that are rule bound, remember we were talking about rules a couple minutes ago, mm-hmm. and you force them to break the rules to survive, then they don't know which rules are important and which ones aren't. And so,
and you're saying if they don't have an understanding of the underlying principles of what these rules are predicated on.
Exactly. And because they don't have any control over it, it's a rule that's forced on them without them really understanding the intent or the principle or the science perhaps behind the rule. They feel out of control. And that just increases their stress, that increases their anxiety, it increases their feeling of the government's out to get them. And you have all this crazy conspiracy crap going on, and it's part of that. People don't understand. They get rules shoved down their throat. They don't understand why these rules are there to benefit them or what the intention is. And some of them are good and some of them are not. Mm-hmm. Some of them are adequate and some of them are excessive. And without understanding the whys, without understanding the principles, common sense dictates that some of them are excessive. And so people with even a little bit of common sense start to break some of the rules. And once you get onto that slippery slope, then there's nothing stopping that from picking up speed. And that's what we're seeing in society.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely seems to be, for the most part, some sort of a rebellion. I'm seeing it a lot on social media. A lot of people are really up in arms over all this stuff. I read I think it was an article in the Washington Post a couple days ago that a lot of the a lot of the social media traffic, either pro or con, there's been a ton of what they anticipate is 50% almost revolving around COVID is bot generated. They believe. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, so there's certainly, groups / countries / whatever, accuse who you want of that. But, if there's a lot of bot generated traffic, it's to sow discord. I mean, there's no question about it. Either side. I mean, I'm not even taking a political side here. I'm just saying, if you put a bunch of stuff on both sides, you can inflame both sides of a topic pretty quickly. And there seems to be a lot of that going on. A lot of it, I'm not even going to say that we have really good guidance to begin with, but there seems to be an awful lot of social media buzz that just seems just misguided, from my perspective. And so I guess I totally agree with your principles versus rules assessment here, because inflexible rules don't work in a dynamic situation very well. They just don't. So what's your suggestion as the alternative to that? I know we're going to get into drill down into some of these points, but from a 10,000 foot view, how could we be doing this better?
Yeah, to get it out, I think that the media, if they had a 5-minute, even a 2 to 3 minute, well put together piece that was constantly changing, that addressed some of these topics and started to take examples that are current within the media and go, okay, take for example, we saw this video clip of this person wearing a mask in the park. Did you notice that the mask wasn't being worn correctly? This is why it wasn't correct. And that actually doesn't help the person, and it doesn't help the people around them when they're not wearing a mask correctly. And make it a teachable moment. Mm-hmm. There's so many opportunities with pictures and video that are already blasting in the media 24/7. And we could take those examples and go, okay, see this person? They're actually, did you notice how when they walked up to the person on the street and they wanted to have a conversation, they took a step back and started talking to each other? That's what social distancing looks like. As opposed to, it's about how before we had our personal space, and if someone gets into your personal space, you would naturally back up. Well, now our personal space just expanded.
Well, but that, you're raising a really good point here. Making things teachable moments instead of scolding people. Because it really it's right. I mean, it's stick and carrot almost. The comparison of a stick or carrot approach. If you actually teach people and show them reasons why they should modify behavior and why it's in your best interest and everybody's best interest to do things, I think more people would be accepting of that.
Exactly, instead of rebelling against it, and that's, I guess, what I was trying to get to is that when we just get rules shoved down our throats, then we tend to rebel against the rules. But when we understand what the purpose is and what the benefit is and the why behind the rules, then we feel more in control with that understanding, and then we can make decisions based on our own morality and ethics to again keep our neighbor and ourselves safer.
I mean, are you comfortable though that you know, that sounds good, and in theory, I totally agree with you here, but you do agree there has to be some rules, right? Because you're laboring under the pretense that everybody's going to operate in everybody else's best interest in a society, which, you know, traditionally we haven't shown that as humans, that's always the way we operate. I mean, you know, right? Are we not? Are you not? You know, does that principle, working principally based only, you know, without
Right.
some sort of a
Pollyanna
regulatory
against
nature?
you. Yeah. Okay. You know what, Bob? I mean, yeah, if I was saying that this is the only principles is the answer, then I think I would be rather pie in the sky Pollyanna. But remember when a few minutes ago I said it starts with rules. Rules are the most effective for controlling behavior in the short term. But it's not effective long term, and we see that, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, clearly people break laws every day. I mean, we've made laws since the beginning of time, and since the beginning of time, people have violated laws. I mean,
exactly, and so it is with this, and that's why there certainly is a need for some rules, and the challenge is to find that balance. And I think that as you know, particularly during times of global crisis, I think that there's a greater level of willingness on the part of people to consider each other as opposed to being you know, entirely narcissistic.
okay. And I've seen both. I mean, that's the part, you know, it seems like crisis brings out the best and worst in humanity.
Oh yeah.
Does it not? I mean, right, there's both, there's two sides of that spectrum, but and I don't want to keep counterpointing and always being the guy bringing up the negative side in the half empty glass. But you know, I struggle at times with, you know, trying to be totally positive about things. But so that being said, you, in your article, you got into a point that I think is a really important point. Well, first, let me backpedal. You mentioned how, you know, the news media, you know, it'd be nice if the media was getting out information and making these teachable moments. I mean, that honestly is what predicated us making the Healthy Indoor Show a live stream weekly, because it used to be a monthly recorded show that was, you know, not timely really. You know, we were pushing it out for each issue of the magazine, but it was, you know, something that was often segments from months earlier. So, I mean, that drove us to go there, you know, for this specific topic during this pandemic, because, you know, we felt the need for our readers to have, you know, some sort of a really, you know, between those monthly magazine releases, we needed to put something else out there. So that drove us on it. But you mentioned the concept of risk assessment and differentiating the difference, you know, differentiating the difference. That was a little redundant. Differentiating between hazards and risks. And can you elaborate on that? Because I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we don't tend to get a lot of training, you know, growing up in school, through the school system or post-secondary on risk assessment, even though it's one of those fundamental core dynamics that plays through everything that we do every day. Every decision that we make relates back to our risk management and what are the pros and cons, what's the benefit versus the cost of a decision. And risk assessment is taking that cost benefit analysis to safety. And we do that. In kindergarten, it's like stop, look, and listen. When you get to the crosswalk, cross at a crosswalk. But even so, stop, look, and listen. Look both directions. Make sure that there's no cars coming towards the crosswalk and that they're slowing down before you step in front of them. And so it is with risk assessment. And people often don't understand the difference between hazard and risk and exposure. And so hazard in this conversation is the disease, COVID-19. We don't want to catch COVID-19. That's the hazard. Risk is what is the odds? What's the chances that you're going to come in contact with SARS-CoV-2, the virus, and if you do come in contact with it, what are the odds that you will become infected with the disease? So that's the difference between hazard and versus risk. Hazard is the disease. Risk is what are the odds that you're going to come in contact with it, A, and B, what are the odds that you will be infected through that contact? And that's where exposure analysis comes in. Because, for example, you can roll around in SARS-CoV-2 and have it all over your body, but your skin is a wonderful barrier. And so even though you, came in contact with it, you still are not going to become infected unless it gets inside your body. So, do you have any cuts or wounds? You don't want it to get into your blood. What about your mouth and nose, primarily? Eyes, secondarily, because it's a very thin mucous membrane, but primarily into your mouth and nose. And so as you can get it all over your hands, you can touch stuff that's contaminated all day long, and as long as it doesn't get inside your body, you're not going to become infected. The risk is still very, very low. And then you wash your hands and you get on with life. But if someone, if you're coming in contact with aerosol transmission, droplets, aerosolized droplets, the airborne transmission is the primary cause of becoming infected with COVID-19, and so that's the greater risk, and that's what we've seen coming out of CDC and every other resource that we watch.
And there's more than a subtle distinction here too. Just because a surface potentially has a viable virus particle on it for X number of hours after the point, what is the real risk there necessarily?
Yeah.
And I don't think we've really delved into that. Even the research, that I've seen come out where it shows the amount of hours of viability, still don't necessarily delineate what is the risk of you contracting, COVID-19 from exposure to that SARS-CoV-2 there on that surface.
I'll give you a good example of that. I had to drop off a check in an envelope at the city hall this week to pay for a particular fee, and and they told me that we have a policy right now during COVID that we will not open the envelope for 72 hours to process it, which means that my project that needs to be signed off is stuck for another 3 days. That's what I'm talking about in terms of restricted deal flow. That's not sustainable. And then you look at the risk. Okay, on paper, all the studies show that the virus particle is inactive within 2 to 3 hours. That's one factor. The other factor is if the person opening the mail in the morning was to open all the mail and then wash their hands and follow a safe work procedure, really, is there any risk? And and probably by the time that, even if they stuck it in the box and left it there for double the time, for 4 or 5 hours, they could still process all the paper the same day.
Well, yeah, and just that 72, yeah, it just doesn't seem necessarily reasonable. I would say, and this is a conversation I've had in my house, when we first started receiving packages, from Amazon or whatever, like, what do you do with them? Should we be spraying them down with, a quad ammonic, spray before we bring them in the house? And honestly, no, I don't feel that way. I got down to the point where, we would just let stuff sit for a few hours and, out in the foyer outside of the, basically outside of our living space, and then go out there, decarton items, recycle the cartons like we normally would, and then go wash your hands. I mean, is that not a more, reasonable approach? Yeah, I'm not going to lick my fingers after touching that pack from Amazon. Because, I don't really know how long this particle is active and it could cause a problem, because I don't think we really have all those parameters even figured out, do we?
Well, cardboard is double the length of time of paper, and so we might want to give that a little bit more, quote unquote, resting time. Another thing that we haven't talked about is the half-life of the virus, and and we're told that the half-life is 4 to 6 hours, and so CDC has stated that time is an engineering control. That if you can wait before going into a known contaminated site, that just that time factor reduces risk. So if there was 1 million particles of virus in that cough by a infected person, and it sprayed all over the surfaces that were in proximal to that person when they coughed or sneezed, and so you're starting with 1 million at that point. Well, in 24 hours, you've gone from 1 million to 500,000 to 250 to 125 to, and so on. And you keep cutting that in half and half every 4 to 6 hours. Within 24 hours, you've 90% of the virus is inactivated.
Isn't some of that based on surfaces?
Depending on the surfaces.
Yeah, it depends on the surface, right?
Right.
So certain surfaces have a longer.
That can impact it as well. So, we have to consider all of those factors and then take reasonable precautions based on the level of risk that there is. So, you have a cardboard, you have the contents go into a box at the Amazon fulfillment facility. Let's even say that it was contaminated at point of packing. By the time the contents gets to you,
it's quite a few hours.
Very little virus, if present, would still be active. And then consider the outside of the package, the safe work practices of the delivery chain is that they're wearing gloves when they touch the boxes and the parcels, and and they're setting it at the doors. They clean their trucks, they clean their, so there's a pretty decent set of safe work practices that, again, mitigate it and are all buying you time as it comes to your door. So I think by the time something comes to you, and to my knowledge, and correct me if you've heard something, but I haven't heard of anyone getting infected from a delivery from an online purchase.
I have yet to see any documentation to that effect, so I would concur. That doesn't mean it hasn't, but I mean, it doesn't seem to be something that certainly is a commonplace occurrence.
And again, this gets back to hazard versus risk, and what are the chances, and so where we need to focus our attention is on the higher risk activities. Otherwise, I think we go nuts. We'll drive ourselves crazy.
I mean, so that drives me to some of the other missing links that you've alluded to and actually described in your article. Safe entry procedures, safe procedures in the building. Is there a way to achieve these? We've got so many different business sectors, right? So many different work environments, so many different types of parameters, right? They vary geographically, they vary by business, they vary by the type of clientele. I mean, climate, there's factor upon factor. So how would we implement something like that, or how would that even look?
Well, first off, it's absolutely achievable. And it starts with it starts with the assumption that everyone entering a building has potentially contaminated themselves in the process of going from their home to that building that they're entering. Okay, with me so far?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So the first priority in order to create a safer space in all buildings is to have a safe entry procedure. And that means everyone entering, whether staff, employee, delivery person, or, must clean and disinfect their hands and feet on entry so they don't track in the germs from the uncontrolled spaces that they just came out of. And that will break the chain of contact transmission so that everybody starts their experience inside that building that they just entered on a level playing field, right? Everybody has removed the fomites, the germs from the bottom of their shoes and from their hands. And even if they were asymptomatic, and by asymptomatic, we mean someone that is infected, but at this point isn't showing symptoms, and yet they are viral shedding.
Mm-hmm. Which is a lot of that, apparently, in this case.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but that viral shedding only takes place when they speak, cough, laugh, sneeze. That's the only time. And also, if they use the washroom.
You've described all my activities, though, Graham, because because I'm really not a real static person.
Yeah. So initially, though, everybody starts off, and I think about when I go in and grab a prescription for my wife at the drugstore. I don't have to touch a door going in. I can make my way to the pharmacy counter for prescription pickup without touching anything. I can say hi. There's very little aerosol droplets in low volume speech, and I get to the counter and I say, I'm here to pick up a prescription for my wife, and I give the name, and they grab it, and there's a plexiglass barrier at the counter, so that if I'm a, how did our prime minister say it, a moist speaker,
A moist speaker. Okay.
then the plexiglass there is there to stop that. And I grab my little bag of prescription and away I go. I haven't touched anything. And so I haven't contaminated the store. I haven't had to, I tapped my credit card if necessary, or I might have touched the point of sale terminal. And there's very little that needs to be cleaned and taken care of by that business as a result of that transaction, right? So with a safe entry procedure, you're breaking that chain of contact contamination, and it just makes it easier and easier for that business to maintain their facility in a germ minimized state. There's no such thing as a germ free state, but I want to use the term germ minimized state, right? And it just makes it easier. And that's what a safe entry procedure will do for you. The second thing is that since airborne transmission is the bigger risk, that's where masks will protect others and all surfaces from you if you happen to be viral shedding and not know it. So people are getting, this week, the big discussion and everywhere seems to be talking about masks again. And I don't know why this is such a hard topic.
Because the misconception of the difference between what a respirator, a personal protective PPE versus a mask, because a mask is really not PPE, correct?
Correct. It's as one person put it, it's the easiest way to show respect to your fellow man. You don't know whether you're viral shedding. It's not about everybody else. Wearing a mask, a non-medical mask, or a non-PPE, not something that does not require fit testing, is all about protecting others from you. Now, where building safety comes in is it's all about protecting others and all surfaces from you. Because remember, if you're speaking in that store and you're wearing a non-medical mask, then you're keeping even that aerosol droplets during your speech to yourself, and it's not going on to that workstation. It's not going on to any surfaces within that building while you're there. So this isn't a human rights issue. This aligns with the sign on many doors in the past that said no shirt, no shoes, no service. Now it's going to be no shirt, no shoes, no mask, no service.
And that doesn't to me, and I mean, maybe I'm just simplifying. That doesn't seem all that unreasonable based on the knowledge that we have right now. I mean, especially in the case, the critical mass cases of, as your prime minister described as the moist talker. If you have the moist talker in close proximity who's being verbose, if he has a mask on his face, he's going to spew less of his spittle in your direction.
Exactly. Yeah. So to me, those are the two things, and they're really easy and they're really cheap.
Well, yeah, I mean, once you start to get the actual stock inventory of this stuff up, where you can actually acquire them, I just ironically just earlier today I received a shipment of KN95 masks now, because you can get the Chinese KN95s pretty readily, or somewhat readily, at a very escalated price, I might add. but just to have them, because I'm still a consultant, I still go out and, active in the field. And,
Sure.
and the problem is when you walk in, well, there's two problems. Like I was using my full face P100, an air purifying respirator. And of course, I actually had to go into a healthcare environment the other day. And the facility manager actually was pretty astute. In the healthcare environment, he goes, "That's the kind of thing that protects you and not me." And I go, "That's exactly right." Because you have an exhalation valve on it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
like, I'm very well protected walking in your facility. However, you're not protected for me even a little bit because I have an exhalation valve.
Have you noticed? Yeah, Bob, that brings up a great.
I've been saying that for 2 months. It's like, those respirators that everybody was touting, which really for your personal protection are good. You don't filter your outgoing air out of that mask or respirator. And I think that's the other problem. We tend to, even I and you as professionals, interchange the term respirator and mask.
Yes.
And that, I think that's what's confusing to people that are not in the industry and the general public, because they can't separate those two terms. We use them interchangeably, but we know what we're speaking about.
Yeah. And like those N95s is a fantastic example. There's two styles of N95s, one with an exhalation valve and one without. The one with an exhalation valve does very little or does less to protect others from yourself. It protects the wearer more so, and that's what it's designed for.
Yeah, in fact, those fabric masks, the homemades and things that people are wearing actually do a better job of protecting those around you than a high-end $150, $200 full-face respirator with an exhalation valve. There's no question about it. Because again, you're not filtering your exhalation at all. The air you're blowing out, it's coming right out of your mouth.
Well, it is, but it's also having to be directed through that valve, which the air goes around it, but does the globs of goo coming out of your mouth bend around, or does it go straight? And what I see,
that's a valid point.
What I see from the people wearing N95s, and I've had this comment from numerous different people, especially from companies where their employees wear them while they work, is that the exhalation valve starts to drip.
Yeah, when you're wearing the mask long enough and you're starting to accumulate that moisture in there, it does.
That's right.
You're literally dripping perspiration out of the mask.
If you're viral shedding, then those drips contain virus, and every drip, wherever it lands, is potentially a contaminated surface. So that doesn't happen if you're wearing an N95 without an exhalation valve. So little nuances that make you go,
Yeah,
right?
okay. Yeah, but this is important discussion, because again, to the general public, they don't understand these nuances at all. In fact, many professionals don't understand the difference, because I'm speaking to people in the industry that they look at you and go, "Oh, yeah." It's a different mindset. So what you're advocating is really a combination of social distancing and masks when you can't social distance, or as part of that, or like how do you see those working together?
Well, you know what? Social distancing is important and it's helpful if you can do it. But there's many circumstances where it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. You have to, and you naturally are going to be closer than what social distancing recommendations are. The 6 feet. So if you can't, then you need a mask. And this goes back to, because inside, a mask isn't just to protect the people, it protects the business from being contaminated by aerosol droplets from the people that are coming in. And that's an important distinction also that I don't think people are talking about, is how do I keep my business safe from everybody that I don't know that comes in to buy stuff from my store? Or, you know, how do I keep them from aerosol droplets on all my racks of clothing that I've got for sale? The only way to do that is wearing a mask, requiring everyone to wear a mask in the store. And now all of my inventory is protected. Right?
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes total sense. I've never had an issue with this whole mask thing. It bothers me that, you know, that people have construed it to be some sort of a, you know, a rights issue. You know, it's your right, you know, it's your right not to wear it. Well, is it really?
My point to that, Bob, is that I don't hear anyone talking about how the businesses can protect their inventory from contamination and all the surfaces within their building from contamination if people would just wear a mask when they come into your business.
I haven't heard that mentioned ever, you know, at least in any you know, dedicated article or a piece. I haven't heard that conversation.
Right?
So it's another one, you know, you've touched on really a bunch of missing links. I mean, I really agree. That's why when you first proposed the article and I took a look at it, I was like, oh yeah. It's like these are topics that for some reason have been you know, distinctly missing from all these conversations that we're having for the past 2.5, 3 months here.
Exactly. And you know, Bob, if people wear a mask because social distancing isn't practical or possible, now your restriction of restricting access can go back to normal if everyone wears a mask. So now if the business owner says no shirt, no shoes, no mask, no service, now he can go back to full capacity safely.
Yeah, but there's a problem with that. Think about it in the food service business and restaurants. How do you wear a mask and you know, don a mask and eat your enchiladas? I mean, you know,
dude, you know what? That's an excellent question.
In the food industry. That's the problem that troubles me. The other one is in dentistry. Like, how are you going to get your teeth cleaned and wear a mask?
Well,
there's certain areas that are complicated.
Yeah, and I think that, well, let's take dentistry first. It's always been standard practice that the hygienists and the dentists are wearing a mask when they come to work on you, right? And you're in the dentist chair. Again, if everyone is wearing a mask up until that point that they're sitting in the dentist chair, that's risk reduction. And that protects the waiting room. We don't have to have everybody waiting in their car. They can still come inside if they're wearing a mask. And it protects all the surfaces up until that point where it's sitting in a chair. And now they're going to you know, now they got to open their mouth for the hygienist or the dentist. Now, think about all the times you went to the dentist. How much talking do you do when you're in the chair?
Well, they always ask you questions after they stick the
questions, but generally, you know.
Yeah, you know, Novocaine induced speech that, you know, and then they'll ask you a long form question, not a yes or no.
That's
so
right.
Tell me about how you're, you know, whatever.
So yeah, your talk is very limited when you're in a chair, and again. I think it's about risk reduction and managing risk. And there's no such thing as risk elimination.
What's in anything?
In almost any circumstance. Right. It's about risk reduction and can we reduce the risk significantly enough where we can create an economically viable environment, right? Restaurants, I'll admit, I'm still having a hard time wrapping my head around restaurants. All of the entry, all of the activity up until the time that you eat, you could wear a mask. And again, risk reduction, you could reduce the risk significantly if you only took your mask off when you're eating.
That's true. I mean, because again, it is the amount of time, right? That's the factor that people have talked about. The amount of exposure is relative to the amount of the viral particles and how long you're being exposed to those, right? Because it's the longer you're exposed, the more number of particles you're exposed to.
Exactly. And so again, if again with restaurants, if everyone was wearing, and again, I can't say that I like the idea. I don't like wearing a mask. I'll be the first to admit it. It sucks. But if it means that I can go to my favorite restaurants and have a dining experience where I can eat their food fresh and hot, as opposed to the delivery takeout skip the dishes method that we've been doing.
It's a bit soggy.
Right? It's not the same. So
it's really not.
So yeah, I think it, and again, the serving staff and everyone, do I want to be served by a server wearing a mask? Not particularly, but if it means that the restaurant can be open and be serving me, and we can give this restaurant owner at least a hope in hell of staying in business, then that's the least that we can do for them. And I'm willing to put up with a little inconvenience for that.
Yeah, no, I totally concur with that. But it's funny. I walked into a liquor store last week. It sounds like set up for a punchline, but I was wearing I probably had an N95 on. I don't know. I have a P100 disposable too, and a bunch of other little junky things. But I walked in there and I said, and it's a local store, and the comment I made was like, on what planet in previous years would it be okay for me to walk in your liquor store wearing a mask? Like, that's not usually a good sign when somebody walks in here. He's happy. I go, you're happy to see me. And previously to this pandemic, would you have been happy to see somebody walking in, at 8 o'clock at night with a mask on their face? Probably not. Yeah,
no. Very, very true. I don't think we see people in ski masks in buildings yet, though.
Well, I'm not seeing the ski mask as being really the effective method anyway. So there's one final point in your article that I just wanted to touch on. I know we're running out of time here, but you talked about the difference between controlled and uncontrolled environments, and I'd like you to elaborate on what you meant by that and how that is a factor that we need to be considering.
Yeah, I'm going to answer the why first on that question. And the why is because the human condition is such that it's impossible for anyone to maintain heightened vigilance at all times. And the stress and the mental fatigue just creates all kinds of unintended consequences that impact society at every level, personal all the way up. And there's just so little acknowledgement of this. And there's such a crying need for addressing the mental health issues of the population during time of pandemic and the need for resiliency training. So that's my first hobby horse on the why. Now, the way to help people with this whole risk reduction and risk management and stress reduction and mental health management is to separate everywheres that you go into 3 spaces or 3 environments. And what I came up with is you have a controlled environment, which is where you have control of all the variables in your surroundings. Mm-hmm. This is like your home. This is your vehicle. Everyone that has been in there. What cleaning processes have been done to create a safe space. Whether you have a safe entry procedure and whether everyone follows it when they come in. And so when you are in your safe space, in your controlled environment, you can let down your hair, you can relax, you can live normally without stress and being a germaphobe. Now you leave your safe, controlled environment and you are now in an uncontrolled environment, which is where there may be safety measures, but you aren't in control of them. You don't know who is doing what. You have no control over the environment. This might be public transport, taxis, Uber, airlines, outdoors, public restrooms, any building that is not observing effective safe entry procedures. That's an uncontrolled environment. Mm-hmm. And when you don't have control of all the variables, then you need to be vigilant and use these measures in public, in these uncontrolled spaces that help you stay safe, right? So that's the uncontrolled piece. And then in the middle, you have semi-controlled. This is where you can control some, but not all of the variables. And this is when you go to work and you go to the office, you go to your business, you go to your work environment, typically, and your desk, you have complete control of. You don't know who was at the coffee station or at the water cooler last, and what they, whether they touched it, mm-hmm. and what they did. The cleaning processes that are happening in your office, and the frequency uptake, and what disinfectants are perhaps being used, and so forth. And so you have more knowledge of the control, and there are spaces within that environment that you have greater control. And so you're able to be more relaxed than you are in an uncontrolled space. Not quite as much as when you're home, but it's not a free-for-all like in an uncontrolled environment. And so those semi-controlled spaces, again, I race motorcycles, and there's a difference between full throttle going at max race speed versus track time, where it's not a race. There's a difference, and I'm not pushing the razor's edge. The level of stress isn't nearly as high, and anything that you can do to reduce your stress level, because you can't sprint all the time. You have to save that sprint for that uncontrolled space. And you got to be able to slow down to a pace that's manageable and sustainable the rest of the time. And so that's really what I'm trying to explain there.
Yeah, that's a valid point. We've got one audience question I want to jump to just to get this in here. The question is, do we still need to worry once herd immunity is achieved? And I guess my caveat would be, do we even know that there will be a herd immunity achieved? And, but I guess leave it at that. Do we still need to worry about this, dealing with this SARS-CoV-2?
Every good answer starts with that depends. There's so many variables on that, and in terms of levels of worry, that depends. Are you an at-risk population risk group? If you're in the population risk group that's more susceptible, then your level of worry when you're in an uncontrolled environment should be higher than someone who is a lower risk population group. So it really, there's a lot of variables. That's not a simple answer. And herd immunity is exactly what you said. I mean, a virus, at the best of times, a vaccine has not been provided complete immunity to a disease. It provides a heightened percentage. Yeah, typically, the flu vaccines have been 30 to 50% effective in any given year. I don't see that science and medicine is going to produce a vaccine now that is suddenly much more effective than any virus vaccine that they've created in the past. Antibodies, there's some exciting developments in science around creating antibody treatments that will provide resistance, really good resistance, if not immunity, to people that receive it. And that could be a way of initially treating high-risk people in order to give them a less worry when they go out into the uncontrolled environments. That would be, that I think are the two most reasonable scenarios. And the other one that we haven't discussed, which is still out there and needs to be part of the conversation, is just the reality that the virus could run its course and cease to be an issue for the global population in a given time. So, we just don't know, and only time will tell on some of these things.
Yeah, I mean, viruses do often devolve right into a non-viable, non-problem. So wow, I mean, just we're out of time now, unfortunately. Graham, this I'm really happy that we had the opportunity to bring you on this week and talk about your cover story from the May digital issue, Healthy Indoors. And again, if you haven't seen that article, let's switch over to it. You can get to it at healthyindoors.com and go to the magazine drop down, if it ever gets to it. And this is the actual. This is the issue, and of course we're seeing a little bit of weird green screen effect here, or the artifact. But the article is available again in the May 2020 digital issue, Healthy Indoors. You can get to that at healthyindoors.com. It's free, always available. All of our 7 years of articles and magazine issues and videos, all that's available free. You can also access the Healthy Indoors show there. So you can see both live streams each week on Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time, as well as catch all the recordings and even get to our podcast, which is pretty cool. So if you'd rather not look at our beautiful faces, you do have the opportunity to not look at our beautiful faces and hear our angelic voices. I guess we could go that way, right? So, with that, I again I'd like to give a definite shout out to my absent co-pilot of this week, Joe Medosh, the healthy building scientist from Hayward Score. He'll be back again with us next week. And next week's show is kind of cool. We have Larry Sloan, the CEO of AIHA, the American Industrial Hygiene Association, along with a group of kind of who's who, certified industrial hygienists, Mike McGinnis, Dr. David Krause, one of our regulars, and Jack Springston are going to be on to talk about what may be the evolution of the industrial hygiene profession. So this should be a real good topic next week. So definitely join us next Thursday. That'll be on June 4th. From 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time. Also, the American Industrial Hygiene Association annual conference went totally digital this year. So that runs the 1st through the 4th next week. It's AIHCE. You can get to their website and actually participate and join that event via online attendance. So that's all available. So I did a little plug for AIHA. That's cool. Everybody gets a plug. So, so does Graham. So Graham is, again, the director and the master trainer for the infection control training group out of Vancouver, British Columbia. And he's a hell of a forward-thinking guy. It's always a pleasure to have you on and have a conversation with you, whether we're on camera or not. And you're welcome back anytime.
Thanks, Bob. Pleasure to be on today, and it's great to have an opportunity to just expand on a short article, because it's hard to flesh out some of those ideas sometimes on a page.
Yeah, there's no question about that. That's actually that's been one of my challenges when when I try to write, to try to succinctly get a point across, and you can't really have a dialogue, right? It's kind of one way. Yeah, a little dialogue today. That was fun. So
Wow.
again, for the Healthy Indoors Show and Healthy Indoors Magazine, I'm Bob Krell. We'll see you next week. Please stay safe.